Hi, everybody. I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Oh, Stacy.
Max, this is the last week that I am allowed to wear white, according to the fashion police. So, when Labor Day comes up, we're not supposed to wear white after that. So I'm going to wear as much white as possible. Hopefully I'm not blowing your eyes out.
You look like the Good Humor woman delivering ice cream in the Good Humor woman truck. Ding, ding, ding.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of looting and plunder going on, and we have to refer to the quote from Frederick Bastiat that we refer to all the time, because this is something we've warned you about for a decade now, and it's really, really coming true. Frederick Bastiat said, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it.
Good words of warning there. Looting begets more looting. It becomes institutionalized, becomes accepted at the top, and then you have a class of people that come up with elaborate ways to defend their looting in the name of, let's say, patriotism or religious fervor or
capitalism,
some other reason, right? And then society splits apart, and that's where we're at.
Well, let's talk about the looting and plunder that we see. Up at the top, we have the central bank. And what do? Money printer go brr, right? What is that doing? But stealing. It's theft through inflation. Inflation is a form of theft. It's taking savings from people who don't necessarily want their savings looted. Then you have the private equity group below them who are overseen by the central banks, the next step down from the central banks. The private equity, what do? They strip a company, they buy up these companies using the company's own assets, by the way. Like, that's a form of theft, right? Like, okay, we're going to use your net assets. We're not going to use our own money. We're going to buy you out and then hollow it out, swap your assets for debt, bankrupt the pension of your company employees, and then we're going to leave a carcass of an economy behind. And now the next step, as we see these people looting and rioting in the streets, plundering in the streets, smashing up small businesses and medium-sized enterprises and stuff like that, and militias forming, here's from the left-wing side of it. Here's
here comes the money shot. Check this out.
This is crazy,
It's
right?
crazy, right? Let's check it out.
It's so crazy. Be prepared. Sit down if you're not sitting down right now.
Strap yourself in. It's going to be a wild ride the next 30 seconds.
It's actually a GOP myth that has, over the last 20 years, really crawled into an even leftist discourse that the small business owner must be respected, that the small business owner creates jobs and is part of the community, says the author of In Defense of Looting.
So the small business owner is no longer seen as the engine of the growth in an economy. This is a deferral to the Keynesian central planners. I mean, this is the alternative to having small businesses at the root of the economy, is to defer to central planners, right? So that's a repudiation of the entire concept of the Enlightenment, going back to Adam Smith, right? So this is a return to either neo-feudalism, that you must respect the king, and only the king knows, or it's an acceptance of a certain, let's call it Sovietization of an economy, centrally planned Politburo. Those are the two, that's how you would justify this if you believe in those two systems.
I mean, of course, we have a robber baron system now, right? We have Jeff Bezos just turned to a 200 billionaire. He's worth 200 billion, the first ever to be worth that much nominally. That is because exactly what this person is talking about. Private equity has already looted a lot of the system. And then into that comes all of these huge monopolists that have monopoly pricing power and predatory pricing power over, people who provide the goods and services to the marketplace, like Amazon. So we already have a system whereby they're championing. So now this person is saying that, and National Public Radio in America is amplifying it, is saying that this is justified to loot because somehow, we can't talk about the bigger systemic issue, like the looting from the top, the central banks, then the private equity, and then the banks, and then all this. Let's target our fellow ordinary schmuck citizen, because that's the only person we have power over. We can throw rocks and destroy their business. It gives us some sense of closure, of fulfillment, that we've done something, because we can't touch Bezos. We can't touch the system. We can't touch the financial or monetary systems.
Well, I think there's also something going on here in terms of the left is sensing a loss in November election. And they're trying to cause trouble. They're stirring the pot, and they're trying to get a little bit of a civil war going, that they can blame Trump for that. But one way to do that is by saying it's okay to loot the small businesses. And that's a pernicious and ugly comment meant to stir social unrest, looting, and violence. So that's what the left is up to now. And by the left, we have to include folks like CNN.
Of course, as one of these cities, Portland or something, was burning down, there is that famous, chyron going across CNN of, their reporter. Right behind him, everything is on fire. He says, fire at largely peaceful protests. Like the entire high street is on fire.
Right, it's like, oh, how was your trip on the Titanic? Oh, a little wet toward the end there, but otherwise great.
Well, so one thing I do want to mention before I move on to the systemic issue that these people on the street are not addressing, and that's the central banks and the monetary system, is that, if you look back to the 1972 elections, and a lot of people are saying that right now in the streets, it reminds them a lot of the late 60s and early 70s in America and the unrest and protests that were happening then. Of course, it was animated back then by not only the civil rights era, but also the anti-war movement in Vietnam. Now it's a little bit more harder to decipher. But on the left, you do have that same problem that you had back then, which was a new, young, powerful in their size. The boomers were coming of age back then, and they were way more left than the older Democrats who wanted the corporate sort of Hillary Clinton candidate. And back then, the younger anti-war protesters wanted somebody like George McGovern, who was like the Bernie Sanders of the day. So there is that sort of divide of a powerful generation coming on stream, which is the Generation Z and the younger millennials. But in terms of the overall larger picture that they're missing, is this: one bank finally tells the truth. The Fed policies have become part of the problem. And this is Rabobank from the Netherlands, and it's Philip Mary, who in his Fed postmortem titled The Wrong Kind of Symmetry, he writes that in one of the most overt criticisms of the Fed we have read to date, Mary writes that while the Fed's step to make the inflation target more symmetric may benefit the wages of the average American somewhat beyond 2020, it does not really address the deeper problem with the role the Fed is playing in the U.S. economy. It could be argued that the Fed's policies have become part of the problem instead of the solution. They go on to say, and I'll read this in a bit, but they say that the Fed is enabling and enriching the 1%. That's why Jeff Bezos was worth $130 billion in January, and now he's worth $200 billion, and that's after he gave $30 billion to his ex-wife.
Right. You mentioned the late 60s and early 70s and the split generationally. The boomers were more left than the prevailing Democratic Party at the time, and now we've got the AOCs and the millennials that are more left than the prevailing Democratic Party at the time. So there's this left-wing surge happening politically. In the 71, of course, the U.S. closed the gold window to pay for the Vietnam War, right? So they defaulted on their foreign obligations. So in a lot of ways, what's happening today is a continuation of the Vietnam War and what happened in the early 70s and mid-70s with the rise of the Weather Underground and the SLA and extreme left-wing violent extremists. And this is a continuation. So America borrowed 40, 50 years of time by closing the gold window and by expanding their monetary base. The M2 or M3, they don't count M3 anymore, but the M2 money supply has skyrocketed many hundreds of percentage points to pay for the mistakes of Vietnam, essentially. So this is a revisitation of the Vietnam debacle in that America is now collapsing as it was right before we closed the gold window. And then we flooded the market with this paper money. But the rest of the world, not only Vietnam, but China, Russia, Venezuela, much of the world is rejecting that paper money. So this is an echo of the Vietnam era. And I don't think it's going to work out very well.
As you see, like big banks like Rabobank, well, they said that the much deeper problem for the U.S. economy is the asymmetric impact of Fed policies on households and businesses. The Fed's monetary and regulatory policies have contributed to a form of capitalism where the rewards are going to the 1% and the risks are borne by the 99%. The current crisis response has made it painfully clear again that the Fed's policies benefit high-income individuals and large corporations, while small businesses and low-income individuals bear the burden. While the Fed likes to see itself as part of the solution to America's economic problems, it should ask itself whether it is part of these problems. So that's the top, right? That's what the Fed's doing. These people down at the bottom, in defense of looting, that's the same argument that they use, where they say that looting provides people with an imaginative sense of freedom and pleasure and helps them imagine a world that could be. So again, just like the Fed is doing, they're targeting small businesses and small enterprises to take from them to enrich themselves.
Right. Okay. They use the Vietnam War as a great analogy. By the mid-60s, 25,000 American soldiers dead. Robert McNamara said there was almost no chance of winning. The general said there's no chance of winning. Just like the Fed knows in their FOMC meeting, there's no way to cure these problems. But what did they do in the Vietnam War? And what are they doing at the Federal Reserve Bank? They're going to double down on that.
More troops.
More troops.
More money printing.
More money printing. And they, of course, in Vietnam, they wiped out another 30,000 soldiers, knowing, without any equivocation, that it was a suicide mission. Going from 65 forward, it was all going to be suicide. Mission from America. The Fed is saying, we know these policies don't work, but we're going to triple down and quadruple down because we think conceptually they should, and we're not going to believe the evidence before us that they're not.
That's really important to look into because McNamara was very clear in his private memos to the president that this war in Vietnam was unwinnable. And the same thing, I bet you anything, you're going to find the same thing in 28 years later is when we found out about Robert McNamara, really what he thought. As he sent off tens and tens of thousands of people in America to death, Lord knows how many in Vietnam. But, you know, the same thing I think we'll find out in 25, 50 years. I forget how long they passed a law recently to keep those, the real notes secret for quite a long time. But I think they're probably saying the same thing as like, wow, you know, we're just sending this economy to its death, but we don't know what to do because otherwise we have to save face, right? We don't want to humiliate ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So the prognosis is horrendous, essentially, and economic collapse is what they're banking on with these Fed policies. So, you know, get ready. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Willem Middelkoop. He's the founder of Commodity Discovery Fund and author of The Big Reset, The War on Gold, and The Financial Endgame. Willem, welcome back and congratulations on your book, The Big Reset. We interviewed you about 5 years ago when that book came out. You are the Oracle of Amsterdam. Willem, everything you said in the book is true.
Well, thank you. I remember us meeting on a very cold morning in Amsterdam, freezing cold. And I think I remarked that around 2020, there would be a need for monetary reset. Well, there we are.
So let's pick your brain and get your insights on a few things here. So Dutch bank Rabobank said that the Fed's policies are enriching the top 1% at the expense of the bottom 99%. That is to say the Cantillon effect. Jerome Powell, our Fed chairman over here, denies this. With whom do you agree, Willem, and why does this matter to the economy?
Of course, the Fed can't be too honest on that point. And, you know, the Rabobank, it's one of the main banks, of course, in the Netherlands. It's one of the main banks worldwide. And it's one of the banks who tend to be quite honest once in a while. They have some great economists. So they have been on top of the currency debasement story for quite some time. So I'm glad there's some brains, some good brains here in the Netherlands, trying to be honest. Because you know, Larry Summers, the former Secretary of the Treasury, he remarked a few weeks ago that we are past peak central banking, And Jackson Hole, just 1 year ago, we had Mark Carney, the of the Bank of England, and he gave a speech during lunch, and he said it's time to organize a new monetary system to replace the US dollar. So I think the insiders are, well, they're not becoming honest, but they can't ignore it anymore, one could say.
You know, let me ask you a question about Amsterdam. And, you know, we've been there many times to the Netherlands, and it's such a great country, and that's such a great city. And of course, they have a reputation for being quite liberal-minded, and there's a lot of activism there. We met up with Greenpeace many times in Amsterdam, and our message to them 15, 16 years ago was that it's the central bank that is the root of all of the issues that activists come to protest against. My question is there a growing awareness in the activists, the progressive, the liberal communities that the root of their problem is the central bank?
You're quite right. And one example is, of course, what happened with the millennials. And there's a huge community here in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and all over Europe of millennials who really got involved with the crypto hype in 2016 and especially 2017. And well, I disliked the hype a little bit, but I was very happy that these young people all started to read into the well, the origins of the monetary system, and all the they found out all the excesses of the monetary system. And I myself have been invited quite a bit to their platforms and to their Bitcoin Wednesday seminars, and there's very large interest, not only from the more older, mature, rich guys, you know, the Goldberg community, but there's a whole new generation now, well, discovering the secrets of central banking, and it has been a fraud, of course, for decades, and that's becoming, yeah, well, mainstream, one could say.
Now, your book, The Big Reset, which we talked to you about this when it came out 5 years ago, I believe. Now, the subtitle is The War on Gold. So let's talk about gold, because the people, it appears as though gold is winning the war at this point. Goldman Sachs says the soaring gold price of gold suggests U.S. dollars days are numbered. And we've got Bank of America forecasting $3,000 for gold by this time next year. Is the war about to end in the favor of gold?
Yeah, they're losing the war on gold. The central bankers, the Wall Street, the usual suspects, they're losing this war on gold, as they have done in the 1960s. I know you know a little bit of monetary history. And we had a London gold pool in the 1960s. So central banks were dumping central bank gold reserves to keep the price fixed at $35 per ounce. In the late 1960s, more and more countries didn't want to cooperate anymore, and they started to jump out of this leaking ship. And then we had, of course, in 1971, the disconnect between the dollar and gold. And if we look now, one could say the second London gold pool is failing, and there's a short squeeze especially at the COMEX, at the future markets developing. And if you look at the physical deliveries, we see higher and higher amounts of physical gold and silver being delivered every month now. And this has started in March during the Corona crisis panic. So I think this is the last phase of this gold war, yeah.
People are familiar with what a bank run is. Banks don't have all the money on deposit that they say that they do, and when people are concerned, they go to the bank to collect their money, and it's not there, and there's a bank run. But people are probably not familiar with a gold bank run. The LBMA and the COMEX are facing a problem. The dealers in that market want physical delivery, and it's not available because they've sold it. All they have is paper claims. And this is causing a gold run and a gold buying panic amongst the two biggest exchanges in the world. And of course, as we've seen with stocks like Tesla, when there's a huge short squeeze, these stocks or these commodities, in this case gold, can start to rocket higher just based on market dislocations. But I wanted to ask you about Warren Buffett. He's one of the most successful investors in American history. He's been up to some strange things lately. He dumped a lot of all of his bank shares pretty much, except for one. He got into a gold miner, Barrick, which he said he would never get into gold. He said he would never abandon America, and yet he just put $6 billion into Japanese stocks, and which is another way to essentially get out of the U.S. dollar. Am I correct in viewing these moves by Warren as he's exiting the dollar or hedging against a dollar collapse as much as possible, Willem?
This is exactly the same like we have been doing for the last 10, 15 years. Maybe we were a little too early, but Buffett, we all know he hates gold, but he loves cash flow. And now he's buying into gold miners because they have a huge increase of their cash flows and the undervaluation of commodities. Today we heard the news that he bought into 5 Japanese commodity trading houses, and the undervaluation in the world of commodities is enormous. I was just looking through my charts this weekend, and if you look at the undervaluation of commodities compared to the S&P 500, we reached a new low on a 100-year time scale. So I understand why he's moving to gold now. It's one of the very few sectors where dividends are increasing. I think he likes tech and he likes gold. Both of these sectors are doing amazingly well, especially since the Corona crisis. But well, in tech you have overvaluation and no dividends. In gold you have undervaluation and you have increasing dividends. So he's still a smart guy, and he just turned 90. So congratulations, Warren.
Let me ask you about another money manager, Ray Dalio. He's another hugely successful hedge fund manager. He's got the biggest hedge fund in the world, as a matter of fact. He's now 20% gold bullion. None of this dividend-paying nonsense. He's going for the gusto, the actual metal itself. What does that tell you?
I'm not that surprised that Ray Dalio or one of the other billionaires is moving towards the gold space, because I think the mood has changed since the middle of 2019. In the summer of 2019, Ray Dalio wrote his important new thesis, Paradigm Shift, and we had Paul Tudor Jones and some other very big guys in the US all starting to talk about gold. But what surprised me most was the news today that the Ohio Pension Fund is starting to invest 5% of their assets into gold. And that's a huge sign, because the institutional money, especially from pension funds, and we've seen the same here in the Netherlands, it is not done. The central banks will call you and try to convince you not to put any serious money into gold. And now it is starting. And there's 50 trillion invested in all pension funds worldwide, when only 1% or 2% of this money, let's say 1 trillion, is going towards gold. That would be 10 times the amount of all money invested into the gold space in 2018. So the gold space is a very, very small world. And that's why you see these huge returns now in all gold-related equities. Our fund is having 5 months in a row of double-digit returns now. And people start to notice. So we see huge inflows here in the Netherlands as well. Even
broaden that out to the global investment managed money scene is double that number. It's $100 trillion. So extrapolating what we know to be the case, less than 1% of that $100 trillion is in gold. And if people follow the Ohio pension funds model of going from 0 allocation to 5%, so that means on a global basis, you're going from less than $1 trillion to $5 trillion in gold. The total market cap of gold these days is roughly 8.5 or 9 trillion. So we would see a doubling in demand. You've got your finger on the pulse in the gold market pretty tight there. Is there even that? If suddenly there was a $8 trillion demand for gold, is it even available? Can that be
no.
even sourced? Willem?
No, as you might remember in the big reset, I wrote in 2015 that we could expect a few developments during a monetary reset. One is we need to find a new anchor for world's monetary system. That's what Mark Carney said as well last year. The second one is we need a wave of debt restructurings. But the third one I mentioned in the book is we need a gold revaluation. A gold revaluation means a dollar devaluation. And I also wrote in the book that you can have a gold revaluation because of market forces, what we see now, a strong move up because there's huge demand. Or one could see a gold revaluation to much higher levels because central bankers would like to revalue gold much higher, like they did in the 1930s. And I think when we see some more serious inflows into the gold space, I wouldn't be surprised when we would have a sudden announcement on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday night that central banks are revaluing their gold reserves, and that would change the whole financial industry.
Willem Middelkoop, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank Willem Middelkoop. If you want to find his book, The Big Reset, it's available in different languages on Amazon. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.